This was a place where nothing should make a sound. Not a bird, not a machine, not a scream. And yet, one came. It broke the silence like a fracture through glass. Harsh, breathless, sharp with animal panic. Drace froze when it reached him, a cold echo slicing through the snow-sick wind. The scream didn't come from the radio. It didn't need to. It cut through the storm itself, so thin and raw it didn't sound like a voice at all. But it was. He stood on the elevated walkway outside his shelter, thick boots half buried in snowdrift, breath clouding the air in uneven plumes. Ice crystals formed in his beard. The wind howled off the cliff's edge behind him, dragging powder like a curtain across the world. But he heard it. Faint. Feral. Female. He waited for it to come again. It didn't. Instead, only silence. The kind that pressed down on your lungs and made you forget you were alive. Just the wind, he muttered. Except the wind didn't scream in agony. Inside, he stripped off his snow-layered coat, revealing the rough, thermo-sealed mesh underneath. His hands, still half frozen, hovered over the console's control panel as he ran a surface scan. Nothing. No flares. No life forms. No signals. Only white. Always white. Still, he couldn't walk away. He told himself it was just instinct, an old habit from a different life. Back when every cry for help was his problem. Back when he had people who counted on him. Back when I failed her. The thought hit like it always did. Sudden, ugly, unwelcome. He closed his eyes, jaw tight. Then moved. He reached for the emergency pack, checked his pistol, then grabbed a trauma blanket and a full med injector. The pack was heavier than it should have been. Or maybe he was just tired. He'd been tired since the war. Since the border station burned. Since he stopped letting anyone near. But he couldn't ignore that scream. Not this time. Ira wasn't a planet. Not exactly. It was a massive terraformed continent carved into the southern polar region of Virex 3, one of the oldest settled worlds outside the core ring. Originally an atmospheric testing zone, it had been turned into an exile ground during the Reformation purges. Now, it was a wasteland, a beautiful, brutal grave of snow and wind and silence, used to dispose of political undesirables and inconvenient truths. The temperature rarely rose above -40. The sky hovered in a state of constant overcast, and most days the snow never stopped falling. But Drace had chosen this. Chosen to vanish here. He'd taken a research post under a false name, built the shelter himself, calibrated his sensors, and stopped waiting for someone to save him from the silence. He wasn't expecting to hear anyone else ever again. He found her 2 kilometers from his shelter. She wasn't moving. At first, he thought she was a body, or worse, a decoy rigged with explosives. She was lying in the snow, bent at an unnatural angle, hair black as volcanic glass spread around her like a broken halo. One leg was caught in an old industrial trap, something left behind from the early predator clearing teams. The trap looked like a crude relic from a darker age, a rusted iron jaw with serrated teeth, each one nearly the length of his finger. Its base had been hammered into the permafrost with a reinforced anchor. A spring-loaded mechanism snapped inward, clamping down with enough force to shatter bone. The edges were jagged, uneven, designed not just to hold but to tear, and it had done exactly that. Her violet skin was bruised and lacerated around the ankle, deep gashes turning dark with dried blood. The leg had swollen grotesquely, and parts of the wound had already frozen over. She was trembling violently, her breaths shallow and rapid. Every attempt to move sent a fresh jolt of agony through her. He could see it on her face. Her mouth opened in a silent cry, gold eyes wide, but no sound came this time. Drace stepped closer, his boots crunching ice. No sudden moves. Hands visible. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly. She didn't understand the words, but she understood pain, and she expected more of it. Her eyes locked on him, wild with panic. When he crouched beside the trap, she flailed with one hand, weakly. Her body barely had the strength to resist. Still, the fear was in her eyes, the rigid line of her jaw, the way she tried to pull away despite the agony it caused. "Don't move," he murmured. "This is going to hurt enough already." He examined the mechanism. The release catch was corroded, frozen solid. No easy way to trigger it without breaking it open. He braced one knee into the snow, pulled his knife, and began working the edge into the gears. She was watching, barely conscious but aware. As he forced the blade inward, the trap shuddered slightly, then groaned with age and pressure. She gasped, her whole body seizing with a spasm of pain. A guttural, breathless moan escaped her throat, and tears welled in her golden eyes. He didn't stop. The knife slipped. He growled, set his shoulder into the frame, and pushed harder. Metal scraped metal. His hands burned from cold. His breath came faster now, clouding over the woman's face as she whimpered in short, broken pulses. Come on, he muttered through gritted teeth. The mechanism snapped. The jaws burst open with a harsh clank, flinging out sharp flakes of rust and snow. Her legs sagged free, twitching in the sudden absence of pressure. Blood oozed from the reopened gashes. She collapsed instantly, breath hitching, eyes fluttering as though she might pass out. He caught her before she hit the ground. Her body was limp in his arms, but her fingers twitched, her entire frame trembling uncontrollably from the cold and trauma. Her face was tight with pain, mouth half open in a silent scream she didn't have the strength to voice. Drace moved quickly. His coat was already unzipped. He wrapped it around her, secured the thermal blanket, and lifted her with both arms. She didn't resist this time. She couldn't. Her head fell against his chest, and for a moment he thought she'd stopped breathing entirely. She hadn't, but she was close. Back in the shelter, Drace worked fast. He lay her on a heated platform near the wall, fed power from the generator into the coils, then pulled off her soaked, tattered wrappings. Her body was covered in signs of exposure. Frostbite near the fingers, bruises along her ribs, old cuts that hadn't been cleaned. Her leg was the worst, torn open, deep tissue damage. It had to be sealed now, or she'd lose it. He injected a local anesthetic. She twitched. A breath caught in her throat. Almost done, he murmured. He flushed the wound, applied biogel to close the deeper cuts, then wrapped the leg in compression mesh to stabilize the tissue. Every touch made her flinch, not from fear anymore, but from the raw, living pain that pulsed with every heartbeat. He wiped his hands, then reached for the flask of warm water. He held it to her lips. She didn't drink at first. Then, finally a twitch. A swallow. Just one. Good, he said, voice low, steady. Stay with me. She said nothing, but her eyes opened just barely and met his. Not with understanding, not with hope, but with something quieter, something bitter and exhausted. Like she'd expected to die and was too tired to be grateful that she hadn't. Hours passed. The wind screamed outside, lashing the walls of the outpost like it was trying to claw its way in. Inside, the heater hummed softly. The woman's breathing evened out, but her body never stopped trembling. Even in sleep, she curled in on herself, as if trying to disappear. Drace sat nearby, his back against the steel wall, watching her through the low amber glow of the emergency lights. He didn't know who she was. Didn't know how she'd ended up alone, barefoot, half frozen in the middle of a terraformed wasteland. But he knew what kind of people left traps like that. And he knew what kind of cruelty it took to leave someone inside one. The thought made his jaw tighten. He didn't go back to his bunk, didn't turn off the lights, just stayed where he was, listening to her breathe, watching the rise and fall of her bruised chest. And somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, the truth settled in him like the snow outside. He was not leaving her. Not again. When she woke, it was not to light but to warmth. Soft, unfamiliar warmth blooming beneath her skin, wrapped around her like a barrier between the present and whatever cold hell had come before. The pain was still there, dull and heavy now, not sharp like before, but it was no longer all-consuming. Her body ached with the weight of it, yet the agony had been carved down into something manageable, something she could breathe through. Breathing, she realized, was possible again. She shifted slightly. A wrong move. A jolt of fire shot up from her lower leg, and a quiet whimper escaped her lips before she could stop it. Her hands gripped the edges of the thick fabric covering her, and she flinched instinctively, drawing herself tighter, expecting a blow or a voice or a hand. None came. The air was still. Not silent, though. Somewhere nearby, something clicked softly. Then a low hum followed, mechanical, rhythmic, soothing in its own way. Her nostrils filled with the scent of heated metal and something faintly medicinal. The cold that had once ruled her bones had been replaced by an enveloping warmth that, though unfamiliar, didn't feel hostile. She opened her eyes. Dim amber light lit the small room around her. It wasn't much more than a steel box, Spartan, utilitarian, practical, but it was insulated, safe. Thin wires ran along the ceiling to old-fashioned lamps. The walls were layered with faded insulation blankets, their seams stitched and restitched in different thread patterns. She saw tools neatly aligned on a shelf, a dented water tank, and an old generator in the corner, its low purse steady as a heartbeat. And then she saw him, the human. He sat on the floor, back against the wall, arms loosely folded across his chest. His head was tilted slightly to the side, his eyes closed, but his breath steady, awake, resting, not sleeping. His coat was gone. The same coat now covered her body. Her fingers curled into it before she could think. The fabric was heavy and worn, its interior lined with thermal mesh. It smelled faintly of salt and smoke and cold air. Her mind scrambled to process the last thing she remembered: white, wind, blood, pain, and him. He'd opened the trap, freed her leg, lifted her up, and carried her, even as she bled onto his clothes. She blinked, her gaze drifting to her leg. The sight made her stomach clench. Her lower calf was tightly wrapped in a pale blue mesh dressing. The material had hardened at the edges, sealing the wound beneath a thin but flexible exoskin. Dried blood still clung to her thigh above the wrap, but the wound itself had been cleaned, treated, and, miraculously, was not festering. As she stared, the man stirred. His head turned just slightly. His eyes opened, icy gray-blue, like storm-washed metal. They settled on her without surprise, but not coldly either. He looked tired, quiet, watchful. "You're awake," he said. His voice was low, a little hoarse, and strangely gentle. Not a demand, not even relief. Just a simple truth acknowledged aloud. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Not yet. Her throat was raw, mouth dry. She hadn't spoken in days. Maybe more. Words felt like a distant memory. He didn't press her. Instead, he rose slowly to his feet and crossed the room. Each movement was deliberate, grounded, as if he knew sudden motion might scare her. He poured water from a steel canister into a small cup, then returned and crouched beside her. He held the cup out without a word. She didn't take it. Her fingers hesitated just above the rim, as if expecting it to be yanked away the moment she reached for it. He didn't move, didn't force her, just waited. Her hand trembled as she finally took the cup. The warmth of it shocked her. She brought it to her lips and drank, too fast. The first swallow burned down her throat, and she coughed violently, nearly spilling the rest. Panic fluttered in her chest. But then, his hand gently steadying the cup. "Slowly," he said, "you're safe here." That word, safe. Did he really believe that? She drank more cautiously, the water trickling past her lips, warm and clean. It was the first thing that hadn't tasted like metal or snow in what felt like an eternity. When she finished, she lowered the cup and finally looked him in the eye. He didn't smile, didn't speak. He just studied her, like someone trying to solve a mystery without scaring it away. His expression held no pity, no judgment, only the quiet gravity of someone who knew what suffering looked like and wasn't surprised to see it. She felt exposed under that gaze, but not threatened. Not yet. He pointed her leg. "You'll be able to walk again. Not soon, but it's healing." She looked down again, touched the mesh with cautious fingertips. The pain was still there, but it no longer ruled her body. That was something. When she didn't speak, he nodded once, accepting her silence. He stood, returned the empty cup to the table, then began to check the heat coil near the base of the platform. He adjusted something, just enough to raise the temperature a few degrees. She watched him, unsure what to make of it all. Why would he help her? No one helped the exiled. She remembered the trap, the metal jaws tearing through her flesh, the way the wind howled while she screamed, unheard. Until him. She shifted again, trying to move her leg. A sharp stab of pain made her wince. He noticed instantly. Don't push it, he said. The exigel will hold, but it won't stop nerve pain. Still, his voice was calm, not scolding, not unkind. She hesitated, then rasped, barely above a whisper, her voice dry and broken. Why? He turned his head, met her eyes again. Because you screamed. The answer hung between them, strangely simple. She swallowed, throat burning. That one word had taken more strength than she'd expected. Her body felt hollow. Her thoughts, fogged, fragmented. He walked to a storage locker, pulled out a thick strip of thermal cloth, and returned to her side. Do you want me to wrap your shoulders? He asked. She stared. He didn't move closer. Just say no, and I'll back off. She didn't say anything. But when he leaned in slowly and draped the cloth around her upper body, she didn't pull away. She just trembled. It wasn't from cold anymore. It was the weight of being touched gently, for the first time in what felt like years. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in days, she let herself fall asleep. Not from exhaustion, but because some part of her, fragile and raw, believed he wouldn't hurt her in her sleep. He watched her breathing even out, her chest rising and falling beneath his coat. Then he turned off the overhead light, letting the room sink back into a low, amber glow. Outside, the wind clawed at the world. But in here, something softer had begun to settle. And Drace, sitting once again against the wall with his coat half gone and his thoughts turning quietly inward, knew one thing. This wasn't just a rescue. Not anymore. The cold was gone. That was the first thing Soraya noticed when she drifted awake again. The absence of pain came second, but it was not complete. Pain still lived in her body. It pulsed through her muscles and curled low in her gut like a coiled creature waiting to stir. But now it was contained. Something manageable, like a fire reduced to embers. Still dangerous, but no longer raging. She blinked slowly, adjusting to the amber light that pooled from the low-hanging panels above. Everything around her was still. The air held the faint, sharp scent of healing gel and burnt metal, but also something else, something warmer. Something like food? A soft sound scraped against the edge of her hearing. She turned her head. He was there. Drace sat near the heating unit, his broad frame hunched slightly as he cleaned a surgical tool under a small stream of heated water. His hands moved with quiet efficiency, steady, practiced, patient. There was no urgency in his gestures, no nervous glances at her. He wasn't waiting for her to panic or lash out. He was simply present. She studied him in silence, her mind still catching up to her body. His jacket still hung around her shoulders, too large, heavy but warm, comforting in a way that unsettled her. She hadn't meant to wake. Not yet. The sleep had been soft, and her dreams, while murky, had not been cruel. But her leg had begun to ache again, sharper now, deeper. Her body was telling her that something had changed. Maybe it was time. He looked up and met her gaze. You're awake, he said, voice low and slightly rough, like someone unused to speaking often. Good. I need to check your leg again. She gave the slightest nod, her eyes dropping to the injured limb still propped up on folded cloth. The dressing had changed since the last time she'd looked. The outer mesh now shimmered with a soft iridescence, a faint pulse blinking along its seams, synced to her own heartbeat. The swelling had gone down. The bruising had faded from a violent purple to a dusky blue, like the last trace of sunset against night. But the pain had returned too, and with it, fear. As Drace stood and crossed the room, she felt her spine stiffen, her breath catch. Every step he took felt louder than it was, like his weight pressed into the air around her. He knelt slowly beside the cot, pulling a slim medical case from under the platform. I need to remove the outer layer, he explained, meeting her eyes again. Flush the site, reapply the gel, and reseal it. I won't touch anything that doesn't need touching, but it's going to sting. She watched him. His voice was calm, his expression unreadable, but not harsh. After a moment, she nodded. Understand, she whispered, voice hoarse from disuse. He reached for the edge of the mesh and paused. I'm going to start now. She flinched as the adhesive cracked away from her skin with a faint hiss. The air touched the wound again, cool and sharp like a blade through soft flesh. Her hands gripped the fabric beneath her, fingers twisting into the blanket. Drace worked with silent precision, lifting the hardened mesh with a hooked tool and easing it back. The raw skin beneath was angry and inflamed, but no longer bleeding. He cleaned it with warm saline, wiping slowly, carefully. Her lips parted. A soft cry escaped before she could stop it. His hand stilled. Almost done, he murmured. Breathe. She did. In through her nose, out through her mouth. Her breath came shakily at first, but she steadied it. The room dimmed at the edges, her vision tunneling with the pain, but she held on. He applied the new gel in a single smooth pass, the fluid thick and cold, followed by a deeper heat that made her legs spasm in protest. It felt like fire under the skin. She gasped, arching her back slightly. Her mouth trembled as she bit back another sound. Drace placed a firm hand on her thigh, careful, grounding. Breathe through it. Don't fight the pain. Let it pass. She did as he said, and the fire faded. The pain dulled again. Not gone, but receding. Her body fell back into the cot, breath ragged, eyes shimmering. She stared at the ceiling, trying to slow her thoughts. Trying to remember the last time anyone had touched her without taking something. Thank you, she said. It came out softer than she intended, almost voiceless. Drace sealed the mesh back into place and sat back on his heels. Don't thank me yet. You've still got a few more of those ahead. She almost smiled. Almost. He stood and moved to the heating plate. The rich, earthy scent from earlier grew stronger. He ladled thick stew into a small metal bowl and returned, setting it gently beside her. You need to eat. Soraya sat up slowly, hands trembling as she reached for the bowl. The warmth of it soaked into her skin. She took the spoon he offered and tried the first bite. It tasted alive, full, real. She ate in silence. Drace didn't speak. He didn't stare. He just sat back and watched the heater flicker. Halfway through the bowl, her hands began to shake. The spoon rattled softly against the edge. She stopped, tried to steady herself. He didn't ask if she was all right. Instead, he said quietly, You haven't had a real meal in a long time. No, she said after a pause. I haven't. Her voice cracked on the second word. She closed her eyes, exhaled. After a long moment, she asked, Do you live here alone? Yes. For how long? 3 years. She looked at him. Why? He hesitated, just for a beat. Because I didn't want anyone else to depend on me. She didn't ask what that meant. Not yet. But the answer stayed with her. After a long silence, she lifted the bowl again. Another bite. Another swallow. Her strength was returning. Not just physically, but beneath the surface, somewhere deeper. Somewhere she hadn't touched in a long time. When she was done, she set the bowl down beside her and turned her gaze back to him. I didn't think anyone would find me, she said softly. I didn't even think anyone would look. I wasn't looking, he replied, just as quietly. I heard you scream, and that was enough. He nodded once. It was. She watched him for a long moment. Her eyes were heavy now, not from weakness, but from a growing sense of safety, a word that felt foreign on her tongue. I'm Soraya, she said. His expression shifted, just slightly. Something flickered behind his eyes, acknowledgement, maybe even relief. Drace, he answered. She nodded slowly. Thank you, Drace. This time, the words carried weight. Not politeness, not instinct, but something real. He sat back against the far wall again, arms resting loosely across his knees. His eyes never left her, but he didn't speak. And for the first time, Soraya didn't feel watched. She felt seen. The heater hummed between them. Outside, the wind dragged itself across the ice like a dying beast. But inside, the warmth held steady. And for now, that was enough. The storm had quieted, not ended. Ira's skies never truly cleared, but the wind had softened to a breath, and the snow drifted gently now, lazy in its descent instead of violent. Beyond the insulated walls of the shelter, The world was still a frozen wasteland, but inside, the silence had settled into something warmer. Something almost human. Soraya sat propped up against the cot's headrest, her wounded leg elevated and wrapped. The pain was still there, dull and throbbing in sync with her heartbeat, but her body had begun to relax, to accept the idea of stillness, of safety. Drace had made tea. It wasn't much, some dried native root, steeped in melted snow, but it filled the room with a bitter, earthy scent that grounded her senses. She held the warm cup between her hands, savoring the weight of it. Her fingertips no longer trembled when she drank. He sat nearby, across from her, his own cup cooling in his grip. He hadn't spoken much since they exchanged names. It was strange that something as small as a name could feel like a turning point. But it was. Names weren't just words. They were doors. Now one had opened. "You're quieter today," she said, voice rough but stronger than it had been. Drace glanced at her, then gave a half shrug. Didn't want to push. She tilted her head. "Push what? You've been through hell. Figured you'd talk when you were ready." She stared at him, watching how the firelight flickered in the tired lines of his face. "You didn't even ask what I was doing out there." "No. Why not?" "Because I already know," he said softly. "Not the details, but the pattern." She set her tea down, suddenly needing both hands to hold something steadier, like her own breath. "You've seen others like me?" "Not exactly, but I've seen what people do when they want to disappear someone. Quietly, permanently." His voice darkened. "Doesn't take much. Wrong birth, wrong beliefs, wrong kind of love." Her throat tightened. He looked up at her. "You were dropped, weren't you?" he asked. "No gear, no beacon, just left." She didn't answer with words. Her eyes did that for her. He nodded. "Yeah, that's what I figured." For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the heater and the soft clink of metal as Soraya turned her cup in her hands. Her gaze dropped to her leg, to the dressing he'd changed without judgment. "They told me I was being reassigned," she said at last. "New role, temporary placement, standard protocol. I didn't even have time to pack." His jaw clenched, but he didn't interrupt. "I was escorted onto a shuttle, hands bound in front of me, subtle enough not to look like a prisoner, but enough to tell me what I really was. When we landed, they shoved me out into the snow. No words, no explanation." "Why?" he asked gently. She looked up. Her expression was raw, not from tears, but from the effort of holding them back. "I refused a bonding contract." Drace blinked, confused. "A what?" "It's how we're assigned mates," she said, as if reciting something clinical. "By genetic council approval, based on bloodlines, breeding potential, projected temperament ratios. I was a historian, one of the research class. My profile marked me as optimal." He leaned forward. "And you didn't want it." "I love someone else." Drace's breath left him in a slow exhale. "They called it genetic treason," Soraya whispered. "Said I was compromising the purity of the lineage tree, that I corrupted my own data by emotionally influencing my mate selection." "Let me guess," he said. "He wasn't high enough for rank." "He wasn't Aurelian at all," she said. The silence that followed felt too large for the room. Drace sat back slowly, eyes scanning her face. "Human." She nodded. "A technician stationed at the archives. He made me laugh. He listened when I spoke. I don't even remember the moment it happened. When I knew, it wasn't a decision. It just was." "What happened to him?" Drace asked. "I don't know," she said. "They took him first." She didn't say more. She didn't have to. The pain in her voice spoke for her, the kind that came from loving someone who was erased from the record, as if he'd never existed. Drace stared into his cup for a long time before setting it aside. "They don't exile people here unless they want them to vanish without noise," he said. "Ira's off-grid. No civilian satellites. No formal colony status. Anyone left here is legally considered dead." "I guessed as much," Soraya said. "Especially after I found the trap." He looked up sharply. "What?" "That thing that caught my leg. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't left over from early expeditions. The rust was too fresh. The teeth had been oiled." Drace's expression darkened. "It was planted." She nodded. "And not just for wildlife." The heater's hum suddenly felt loud. Oppressive. A pressure under the skin. Drace stood and walked to his console. He tapped a few controls, pulling up a visual scan of the perimeter. White static, snow fields, the ridgeline, no movement. But that didn't mean they were alone. I keep a thermal sweep running, he said. If someone's out there, I'll know. They won't be many, Soraya murmured. One or two. Enough to confirm my death, maybe retrieve the body. No trace left behind. Then they're not just hunters, Drace said. They're cleaners. He looked back at her. We'll need to be ready. Soraya's fingers gripped the edge of the cot. Her leg ached. Her heart thudded with a new kind of urgency. Not the fear of dying, but the fear of being taken back. I'm not going with them, she said. Her voice didn't tremble. Even if I can't walk. I'm not theirs anymore. Drace nodded slowly. You won't be alone. The weight in that promise settled over her like a second coat. Heavy, warming, full of a quiet power she didn't yet know how to carry. For the first time since her exile, Soraya allowed herself to believe something dangerous. That someone might choose to stand beside her. And this time, she would stand too. Even if it hurt. Even if it bled. Even if it meant setting the snow on fire. The quiet didn't last. By morning, the soft snowfall had thickened, and the sky had dropped again into a dense gray, pressing low over Ira's frozen skin like a lid. The wind returned slowly, cautious at first, then bolder, carving through the canyon pass east of the outpost with a sound like breath through clenched teeth. Dre stood at the observation panel, one hand braced against the reinforced glass. Outside, the landscape was flat and white, as always still, empty, almost beautiful in its desolation. But he didn't trust stillness. Not here. Not after what Soraya had told him. A trap that clean, that recent meant activity. Someone had been near his perimeter. Someone might still be. He turned back toward the room's center. Soraya was asleep, or something close to it, curled in his coat, her breathing steady but shallow. Her leg was elevated, supported by the same makeshift rest he'd reinforced the night before. Even in sleep, her hands were curled near her chest, not clenched, just wary. Ready. She was healing, yes, but not safe. Dre stepped quietly into the storage alcove and pulled a compact case from a locked cabinet. Thin, black military issue. Inside, one loaded pistol, 2 extra mags, and a small container of field-grade cryocharges. All outdated, all still lethal. He checked the seals, swapped the power cell in the grip, and holstered the weapon at his hip. His mind churned. He didn't know who was out there. No pings from the thermal sweep. No new motion markers. No electronic chatter. But that meant nothing. Whoever had set that trap had done so with precision. With patience. If they were watching, they weren't moving. They were waiting. And waiting, in his experience, usually came before killing. A soft voice broke through his thoughts. You're arming yourself. Drace turned. Soraya had pushed herself upright. One arm braced behind her, the other lightly touching her abdomen where the coat had fallen open. Her violet skin was flush from sleep, hair mussed and tangled against her neck. But her eyes, golden, sharp, were wide awake. I am, he said simply. She didn't ask why. She already knew. Are they coming? She asked. I don't know. But you think they might be. He nodded. She didn't panic. Didn't cry. Just looked away, her jaw setting tightly, as if steadying herself for something she'd known was inevitable. I dreamed of the transport last night, she murmured, almost to herself. The way the airlock slammed shut after they pushed me out. Like I was cargo. Like I didn't belong to anyone anymore. That's what they said, you know. You're no longer of us. As if I'd been unmade. Drace's hands tightened at his sides. You weren't unmade, he said. They just didn't know what to do with someone who wouldn't obey. She gave a short, bitter breath. Not quite a laugh. It's not obedience they want. It's compliance that doesn't speak. That doesn't love in the wrong direction. She looked up at him. You think they'll try to take me alive? He met her gaze, unwavering. I think that depends on whether they think you're still useful. Silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Then Soraya shifted her weight, wincing as she adjusted her injured leg. I want to help. I can't fight. Not yet, but I can watch. Monitor sensors. Help plan escape routes. He frowned slightly. You don't need to. I do, she cut in. Because if I'm just lying here, I'm a target. If I'm doing something, I'm someone. Drace nodded slowly. All right, you help. She nodded back, a flicker of something hard and steady passing across her face. Then she looked around the room. If they come, they'll come from the east, she said. The path curves too sharply on the west side for dropship entry. East is flat terrain and enough sky cover to mass descent. Drace arched an eyebrow. You've studied maps? I'm a historian, she said. Topographical memory was part of my training. I remember what I see. He was quiet for a moment, impressed. Then he pulled over a small portable console, activated a topographic layout, and placed it between them. She leaned forward slightly, grimacing as pain shot up her thigh, but saying nothing. Together, they scanned the terrain. There, she said, pointing. If they landed here, just past the ice shelf, they could move in on foot and be at your door within 2 hours. Less if they're trained. They'll be trained, Drace said. Only trained killers wait for a body to die before collecting it. They spent the next hour mapping out routes, fallback points, and blind spots in the sensor net. Soraya suggested a false power signature to lure intruders toward the collapse mine shaft half a click south. Drace rigged the beacon. When they finished, the heater had dimmed. Snow pressed against the windows. But something had changed. The air inside the outpost wasn't just warm. It was tense with resolve. Two people who had once been strangers, now bound not just by survival, but by shared intention. Drace turned to her. "You got fire," he said. Soraya met his eyes. "I didn't know I still had it. Until now." He looked at her a long moment, then nodded. He was about to turn away when she asked, quietly, "What about you?" He frowned. "What about me? Why are you here, Drace? Really? You said you came here to disappear. But what are you hiding from?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the far wall, where an old, frayed photograph was pinned near the emergency tool rack. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he spoke. "Border war. I was deployed as tech support on a humanitarian mission. We were supposed to reinforce a civilian camp. Mostly women, kids, non-combatants. Someone gave bad coordinates. We dropped 20 kilometers off course. By the time we reached them, the camp was gone." He turned back, voice flat. "Gone. Not captured. Not evacuated. Just burned." Soraya's expression didn't change, but her breath hitched. "My unit blamed leadership. Leadership blamed us. I blame myself. I still do." He crossed the room again, leaned back against the steel counter, arms crossed. "I came here because I didn't want anyone else to count on me. Because if no one needed me, I couldn't fail them." Her eyes searched his face. "You didn't fail me. I haven't saved you yet." "You did," she said, "the moment you didn't look away." He held her gaze, and something passed between them, wordless, weighty, real. Outside, the wind returned, heavier now, sharper. There would be no more calm days. But inside, the storm had changed. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was purpose, and they would face what came next together. The alarm tripped at 3:27 Standard Time. It wasn't loud. Drace had designed it that way. Just a low, pulsing chime that blended with the shelter's ambient hum. But it was enough. His eyes snapped open, muscles tense, breath stilled. One beat. Two. Then movement. He was on his feet by the third. Across the room, Soraya stirred. She wasn't asleep, not really. She rarely was anymore. Her instinct stayed sharp, like blades just under the skin. Even healing, even wrapped in warmth. She lived like prey, expecting the snap of a trap at any moment. Drace crossed to the terminal and silenced the alarm with one tap. The display flared to life, casting faint blue light across his face. A red marker blinked on the eastern perimeter, motion slow and deliberate inside the secondary scan net. He switched views, cycling through thermal imaging, light spectrum filters, terrain overlays. There, two figures, human size, 200 meters out, just inside the ridgeline. No heat bleed. Their suits were insulated and shielded, which meant military grade. Professional, not scavengers, not wildlife. "They're here," he said quietly. Soraya was already sitting upright, teeth clenched as she eased her leg down from the cot. Drace turned to her, frowning. You're not moving with that injury. I'm not staying here alone, she said, her voice steely. You'll slow us down. She met his eyes. Then we'll go slower. He stared at her for a long second, jaw set. But then he exhaled through his nose and grabbed the pack already stashed beside the supply cabinet. She wasn't wrong. Leaving her behind wasn't an option. Not for them, and not for him. He tossed a compact pistol toward her. She caught it one-handed, checked the chamber, and gave a single nod. No questions asked. He would have said it surprised him, but it didn't. Together, they worked in silence. Dre's packed essentials, rations, medical supplies, 2 canisters of thermal gel, and a short-wave pulse beacon that might scramble drones for 20 seconds, if they were lucky. Soraya limped to the console, bringing up the terrain overlay and plotting a rough course south toward the collapse mine shaft she'd recommended before. Still our best bet, she said. They'll expect us to run west toward the higher ground. They won't expect anything, Drace replied. They've already planned for everything. Outside, the snow had thickened again. It was coming down in wide, silent flakes, dense and heavy. The wind had returned too, howling across the outpost's roof in high-pitched bursts like a warning howl that no one needed to explain. Drace moved to the entry hatch, checked the latch, then turned to her one last time. Once we step out, it's live. If you freeze, if you hesitate. I won't, she said, already pulling on her gloves. He gave a single nod. They stepped into the snow. The cold hit like a wall. Even through insulated layers, it crawled across skin and bone, seeping into the spaces between breaths. The sky above was low and colorless. No stars, no light, only white. They moved south in single file, Soraya keeping low despite the limp. Her body was slower, yes, but focused, eyes scanning, posture efficient. Her training as a historian had never been meant for this kind of field work, but it had shaped her brain to analyze threats in motion. She moved like someone who had studied execution patterns and learned where to stand to avoid the first shot. Drace led them through a narrow trench cut into the snow by ancient ice melt. It ran along the edge of a shallow ridge, providing partial cover from aerial visibility. Every few seconds, he checked the tracker. The 2 heatless figures had split. One headed west. The other was circling behind. They're flanking, he said over his shoulder. I saw it, Soraya replied. They didn't need to say more. 40 meters ahead, the ground dipped, just enough to suggest the entrance to the old shaft. It was mostly collapsed, covered by a thick dome of snow and rock, but there was still a way in through a narrow gap between broken metal supports. Drace dropped to one knee and pulled a thermal charge from his belt. Can you fit? He asked. I'll make it fit, she said through clenched teeth. He slid the charge into place and activated it. A low hum vibrated through the snow, and steam hissed outward as the barrier weakened. Soraya crouched beside him, eyes scanning the trees beyond the ridge. Then she froze. Movement. High left. Drace followed her line of sight. A figure, barely visible against the snow, crouched atop the ridge, rifle raised. They had about 4 seconds. Go, he barked, shoving the rest of the snow aside. Soraya didn't argue. She slipped through the gap, pulling herself forward with one arm, dragging the injured leg. It was tight, brutal, but she disappeared into the dark. Drace followed her a heartbeat later as a shot rang out, ricocheting off the metal just behind him. He ducked into the shaft, grabbing the edge as the thermal charge collapsed the snow behind him, sealing the entrance with a thick curtain of ice. Darkness swallowed them. Panting. Silence. Soraya coughed once. I'm fine. Drace nodded, then remembered she couldn't see it. He pulled out a glow stick, cracked it, and the dim yellow light bloomed around them, casting jagged shadows along the metal and stone walls. The shaft smelled of rust and frostbite. The air was thin, but it was cover. They sat for a moment, breathing hard. The weight of what just happened settled over them like fresh snow. Soraya's voice broke the silence. They were going to kill us. Drace didn't answer right away. Yes, he said finally. They still might. But we're not done yet, she said. He turned toward her. She looked small in the confined space, but not fragile. Not anymore. Her golden eyes burned in the yellow glow like coals. No, he said. We're not. A pause. Then her voice dropped lower. Drace. He turned to her fully. If we don't make it, I want you to know I never stopped believing it mattered. That truth, that love wasn't wrong. His throat tightened. He reached for her hand, hesitated, then took it gently in his own. You're not wrong, Soraya, he said quietly. You never were. Outside, they could hear the storm shift again. And footsteps. Snow crunching. Distant. Searching. But inside that frozen shaft, for one quiet second, they weren't hunted. They weren't fugitives. They were human and Aurelian. Survivor and exile. Two people who had found each other in the unlikeliest corner of the galaxy. And whatever came next, they would face it together. The silence that followed was not peace. It was anticipation. In the collapsed mine shaft, beneath layers of snow and steel and frozen time, Soraya and Drace sat side by side, backs against the frost-covered wall. The glowstick's light had begun to fade, casting their shadows in soft golden blurs across the stone. Their breaths rose in quiet, controlled rhythm, steady, disciplined, but the tension in their bodies told another story. They were waiting. Outside, the sound of movement had ceased. The faint crunch of boots in snow, the subtle shift of weight against ice. It had all stopped too abruptly, and that was the clear sign of danger. The trackers weren't just searching anymore. They were listening, hunting. They're above us, Drace whispered. Listening for vibration, sound, breath. They'll have seismic sensors, maybe even a drone worm. Soraya's jaw tightened. Can we stay hidden? For a while, he said. But if they start scanning for thermal signatures, we're done. She looked down at her leg, the bandage stained with dull red beneath the mesh. The pain was constant now, but distant, like a fire she'd placed behind a wall. Not gone, not yet consuming. I won't slow you down, she murmured. You won't, Drace said, without hesitation. Because we're not running anymore. She looked at him, startled. His eyes were clear, focused. The weight that had hung on him since she first saw him, years of guilt and isolation, was still there. But it had changed. It was no longer the weight of retreat. It was armor. I know their tactics, he said. I know how they think. And I'm done letting them dictate how this ends. Soraya watched him, trying to understand the shift in his voice, in his presence. And then she saw it. Not anger, not fear, purpose. Then what do we do? She asked. He turned toward the far wall, pulled a compact transmitter for his coat pocket. It was small, square, and marked with warning stripes. We call them in, he said. All the way in. Make them confident they found us. Then we turn the ground beneath them into a grave. Soraya blinked. The mine, there's enough instability. If we draw them in far enough. We bury the shaft, he confirmed. You'll collapse it with us still inside. Only if we wait too long. A silence fell between them. Then Soraya reached over and placed her hand gently over his. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was steady. We do this together, she said. He nodded once, then activated the beacon. The transmitter gave off a faint chime, barely audible. It was set to mimic a burst of shield core emissions, exactly the kind of signal an injured survivor might leak from a damaged suit or failing medical implant. Drace angled it toward the broken ceiling, setting it near a collapsed beam for better echo. Signal will reach them in 30 seconds, he said. Soraya looked around. There's a pocket in the northeast tunnel. If we wedge the support behind it and hold for 30 seconds after detonation, we might survive the collapse. You're sure? I studied colony schematics. I remember where support beams were set. Drace smiled faintly, the ghost of admiration flickering in his eyes. Remind me never to underestimate a historian again. They moved as one. He guided her through the low tunnel while she limped beside him, never slowing more than she had to. Each step was a study in grit, pain barely kept at bay by sheer will. At the far end, they found the structural cavity, tight but intact, just enough room to brace themselves behind thick alloy ribs and angled rock. Drace placed the det cord with practiced hands, layering the charges into a collapsed ventilation shaft above the entrance. 5 minutes passed. Then a sound echoed through the shaft. Footsteps. Close. Confident. followed by the low hum of scanning equipment sweeping the corridor. They were inside. Drake's hand hovered over the detonator. He glanced at Soraya one last time. She was breathing fast, but her face was calm. Her hand found his. "I'm with you," she said. He pressed the trigger. The explosion hit like thunder beneath the earth. The tunnel shook violently, a roar swallowing all thought, all breath. Metal shrieked. Stone cracked. Heat surged through the walls as the corridor behind them folded inward with the force of a collapsing world. Then silence. It took Drace several long seconds to realize he was still alive. Dust filled his lungs, and pain throbbed in his shoulder from the impact of debris, but his body was still moving, still whole. Soraya was next to him, curled inward, coughing. "Soraya," he rasped, reaching for her. She lifted her head. "I'm here." Relief broke through his chest like light. They'd survived. The corridor was sealed behind them, buried in tons of debris. Whoever had been inside, whatever force had been sent to finish what the exile had started, was now part of the ice and stone of Ira. Gone. Drace pulled Soraya into his arms, holding her close, their bodies shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. "We did it," he murmured. "It's over." "No," she whispered against his shoulder. "It's beginning." He pulled back to look at her. "What do you mean?" She touched the edge of her bandage, then pressed her palm to his chest. "They sent people after me, Drace. Not just to punish, to erase. And now someone's going to notice that team went dark." He didn't argue. He knew she was right. "We'll be ready," he said. She nodded slowly, her eyes bright with something fierce and fragile. "I want to live," she said. "Not just survive. I want a name that's mine. A life that no one gave me permission for. I want that with you." Drace didn't answer with words. He leaned forward, slowly, and kissed her forehead, then her temple, then her lips, soft and sure, the way someone touches something they know will never be theirs to own, only to protect. When they finally pulled apart, the air felt different. Lighter. Outside, Ira raged on, but the storm no longer mattered. They had fire. They had purpose. And together, they had chosen not to disappear. They had claimed their place in the world, not as fugitives, not as mistakes, but as something stronger than survival, as love. And in that frozen place, beneath the bones of a forgotten mine, something impossible bloomed, a future. For the first time since she'd landed on Ira, Soraya could hear her own breathing. Not panicked, not labored, not muffled by pain or snow or fear, but clean, slow, like breath meant to be lived in. Outside the buried tunnel, the snow still howled through broken trees and across the hard, glacial plains, but inside, within the narrow mouth of the collapsed shaft, the storm had passed. The sound was dulled now, hushed beneath layers of stone and ice. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a beginning. Soraya lay on her side, wrapped in the thick lining of Drace's coat, her body sore but still. Her head rested against his chest, his heartbeat slow and steady beneath her cheek. Each pulse felt like a drum calling her back into herself, like a rhythm she hadn't realized she'd been waiting to feel. She shifted slightly, lifting her face to look at him. Drace was awake. His eyes, gray-blue and shadowed with fatigue, were watching her. He hadn't slept. He hadn't moved. He had simply stayed. "You didn't rest," she murmured. He gave the faintest shake of his head. "Didn't want to." She searched his face, lined, tired, streaked with dirt and sweat and blood, but still calm, still his. "You thought the shaft might collapse." He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, but it didn't." "No, it didn't." She allowed a long breath and rested her forehead against his collarbone. "So this is what it feels like, to survive." His voice was quiet. "Not just survive." They stayed like that a while longer. The heater cell between them hummed gently, casting a pale amber glow against the icy walls. The shaft had sealed them in from behind, but there was a crawl space ahead, angled upward toward open air. They weren't trapped, just hidden, alive, together. Soraya closed her eyes. "Do you think they'll send more?" "They might," Drace said, "but they won't find us easily. We collapsed the only traceable signal, erased the heat trails, left no bodies behind. As far as anyone out there knows, we're dead. She exhaled slowly. Then maybe we can start living. When she opened her eyes again, he was still watching her. There was something different in his gaze now. Not fear, not wariness. Something quiet, heavy, and warm. You could have left, she said. You could have buried the shaft and walked. You knew I was slowing you down. You were never slowing me down, he said, voice low. You were showing me why I stopped running. She blinked. Her throat tightened. Why me? Drace didn't look away. Because when I saw you in that trap, I remembered what it felt like to see someone worth saving. And this time, I wasn't going to lose her. Soraya's lips parted, but the words didn't come. Instead, she shifted forward slowly, her weight unsteady but controlled. Her hand touched his chest, fingers curling against the fabric. His hand rose instinctively, not to stop her, but to steady her. She leaned in. Their foreheads touched first, then their noses, soft and tentative, like the breath before a flame. Her skin was cold, his was warm. They met in the middle, like two elements learning how to merge without consuming each other. Then she kissed him. It wasn't desperate. It wasn't fierce. It was steady, grounded, real. A slow, searching press of lips that tasted like warmth after frost, like survival, like everything they hadn't dared to believe they might find here. His hand cupped the back of her neck, anchoring her gently as her other hand found his shoulder, clinging not from fear, but from certainty. They stayed there, mouths barely moving, breath shared between them. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were glassy with unshed tears, but her voice didn't tremble. I'm still afraid, she whispered. I know, he said. So am I. But I want to stay. His brow furrowed. Here, with you. He let out a breath that cracked somewhere in the middle, like a dam breaking. Then we make a life. Not a hiding place. A home. Soraya nodded. We find food. Build. Read. Breathe. Love. Fight if we have to. Together, she said. He smiled then. Not just with his mouth, but with the corners of his eyes. With the way his shoulders finally eased. With the way his hand didn't let go of hers. Together, he repeated. They emerged from the shaft an hour later. The snow was deeper than before, but softer, easier to move through. The sun peeked over the jagged horizon like an old god remembering to shine again. Drace helped her up the ridge one step at a time, and at the top, they stood shoulder to shoulder, looking out over the white world. A horizon that once promised only silence and death now shimmered with possibility. Below them, in the distance, the outline of the outpost still stood. Damaged, scarred, but standing. We rebuild, she said. Drace nodded. And we make it ours. They descended slowly, their tracks winding side by side down the slope. Not fleeing, not hiding, walking forward, free. And in the heart of the coldest place in the known systems, a human man and an alien woman, both broken and rebuilt, began again. Not as enemies, not as fugitives, not as forgotten, but as two souls who had chosen each other, and chosen to stay. The snow was melting. Not completely, of course. This was still Ira, but thin rivulets ran along the shallow dips in the ground like veins of light through ice. The sky was pale and cloud-streaked, and for the first time since either of them could remember, the sun had lingered past noon. Dre stood outside the shelter, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, eyes narrowed against the brightness as he adjusted the new solar panel. It had taken them days to rebuild the array, scrounging parts from old survey drones buried in the South Ridge. But it worked now, barely, stubbornly, and only when the wind cooperated. Like everything else here, it survived out of sheer will. Behind him, the soft sound of laughter echoed through the air, unfamiliar but beautiful. He turned. Soraya was barefoot on the shelter platform, standing in a patch of weak sunlight, like she had forgotten what it felt like to have warmth on her skin. Her silver-white hair caught the light, and for a moment she looked like something celestial, untouched, half-myth. She held a cup of something steaming in her hands, and the way she smiled at him was gentle and almost shy, like she was still surprised she could. You're going to burn if you keep staring into the sun, she said teasingly. He shrugged. Let's try. She walked toward him with slow, steady steps. Her limp was still there, but it no longer pulled her down. She wore it now like a thread in a larger tapestry, one woven with pain, yes, but also with survival, strength, and love. When she reached him, she offered the cup. Spiced root tea, she said. I added a pinch of that moss you keep pretending isn't edible. He took it, grinned. Trying to poison me? Trying to impress you. You've already done that. She looked at him for a long moment. Her smile faded, not because it left, but because it softened into something quieter, something deeper. This is the first morning, she said, that I woke up without fear. He lowered the cup. You mean since the trap? She shook her head. Since childhood. That silenced him. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he did. He reached out and brushed her hair back behind one delicate ear, fingers lingering along her cheekbone. She leaned into the touch, eyes fluttering shut for half a second. Then today's the first day, he murmured, of something new. Her eyes opened. Like what? Like us. Without running. Without hiding. Just being. She stepped closer until there was no space between them. Her hands settled on his chest, just over his heart. You make me feel like I belong to something that no one can take away. He leaned down, touching his forehead to hers. You do. Silence stretched. Peaceful. Intimate. Then, softly, she whispered to Race. I love you. The words weren't hurried or uncertain. They weren't dragged out of pain or fear. They were clear, bright, whole, and they cracked something open in him. He drew her fully into his arms, holding her like the truth of her words was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. Then he pulled back just far enough to look her in the eye. I love you too, he said, like it had always been there, waiting to be named. He kissed her, not with urgency, not with need, but with a fullness that tasted like sunlight, like quiet mornings, like shared cups of warmth in the middle of nowhere. The kiss deepened gradually, her hands sliding to the back of his neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. There was nothing hurried, no fire threatening to consume. Only two hearts speaking without words, finally free to be heard. When they parted, their foreheads touched once more. You're stuck with me now, she said, half laughing. He smiled against her lips. Good. I like where we're stuck. The wind stirred again, but it didn't bite anymore. They turned together toward the shelter, toward the garden they'd just begun to build, toward the walls patched with care and memory, toward the world they had chosen to craft. Not because it was safe, but because it was theirs. A home at the edge of nothing, where love, against every odd, had taken root.